Hi guys and welcome to Crazy Pepper Revenge. This channel is all about crazy true stories, stuff that happens in real life when things get a little bit messy.
I thought I had everything figured out. Decent career as a designer, comfortable home, 3 amazing kids, and a wife I'd been with for over a decade. Life felt solid until one random Tuesday completely shattered that illusion. Driving my youngest daughter, Violet, 19 months old, to the park, she suddenly pointed at a daycare center and clearly said its name. She couldn't read yet, and we'd never discussed that place before. The only logical explanation was she'd been there multiple times previously. This bothered me deeply because my wife, Rebecca, a stay-at-home mom, never mentioned taking Violet anywhere like that. We'd specifically agreed to wait until Violet turned 2 before considering any daycare options. Something felt seriously wrong. So I turned the car around and went inside to investigate. The receptionist recognized Violet immediately, cheerfully mentioning she usually came on Wednesdays. I kept my composure, chatted briefly about nothing important, then left quickly. My mind was racing the entire drive home. Rebecca and I had been married 10 years, together for 12 total. We'd built what I believed was an honest, open relationship based on trust and communication. The idea that she was hiding something significant ate at me, but I tried staying rational, hoping desperately for a reasonable explanation. Unfortunately, Rebecca was on her annual cruise with her aunt, completely unreachable until the weekend. This trip happened every single year without fail. She'd leave detailed instructions, frozen meals for the kids, and I'd take the week off work to manage everything solo. I never questioned it because she always returned happy, refreshed, and frankly more affectionate than usual. This time, she claimed they were cruising near Antarctica, totally out of cell range. That made perfect sense until I started doubting absolutely everything. Once you catch someone in a lie, even the smallest things become suspicious. I remembered she'd called her aunt from our landline recently. I found the number in the call history and dialed without thinking, not considering the time difference with England. The voicemail said her aunt and someone named Peter were on an Antarctic cruise, returning May 3rd. But Rebecca wasn't coming back until May 6th. Who was Peter? Why the 3-day gap between their returns? I checked old photo albums from her previous trips. Tons of pictures showed her aunt on beaches, at fancy restaurants, standing near cruise ships. Rebecca wasn't in a single photograph. Not last year, not the year before, not ever. I'd never noticed before because I'd never had reason to look closely. I dug deeper into our records. Rebecca usually parked at long-term airport parking when flying out late. I pulled up credit card statements expecting the usual $85 parking charge. Nothing. Not for this trip, not for any previous ones either. Even stranger, during all her supposed trips, there were 0 charges whatsoever. Not even for coffee, snacks, or magazines. Suspicion consumed me entirely. I called my sister Charlotte to watch Violet and drove to the airport searching for Rebecca's car. I checked every single row in the long-term parking structure methodically. Her car wasn't there anywhere. So where was she actually going? Driving home, my thoughts spiraled toward divorce proceedings, custody battles, legal nightmares I wasn't prepared for. I had no lawyer contacts, which suddenly seemed like a massive oversight. Desperate for answers, I searched our house, top to bottom. Rebecca loved this house passionately. She'd worked closely with the architect during construction, overseeing every detail. It had 3 floors with a partial basement containing her sewing room and the storage areas. The sewing room was her private domain, so I started there. After checking every drawer, cabinet, and shelf, I found nothing unusual whatsoever. The rest of the house yielded no clues either. No hidden documents, nothing suspicious on the computer, no secret compartments. The next day after dropping kids at school, I returned to Violet's daycare. Staff confirmed she'd attended the past 7 months consistently, typically picked up around 2:30 each Wednesday. Rebecca had been lying to me for months. Back home, I resumed searching the basement thoroughly, moving boxes, checking shelves, shifting furniture, looking for any hidden compartments. Nothing. Frustrated beyond belief, I accidentally knocked over a pincushion, which hit the light bulb, breaking it and plunging the room into darkness. Sitting in the dim light from the stairwell, I noticed a thin beam of light crossing the room, landing directly on my hand. I traced it to a small hole in the wood paneling near the sewing table. Curious, I turned off the basement lights completely. The beam disappeared. Something was definitely behind that wall. I rushed upstairs, grabbed a new bulb, and replaced the broken one. Light flooded the room as I stared at that mysterious hole, wondering what I was about to discover. For 10 solid minutes, I pushed, pulled, and probed every inch of that wall, searching desperately for a hidden door. Nothing moved at all. I was seconds from grabbing tools to demolish the wall when I remembered one of our favorite movies, where a character finds a secret passage by inserting her finger into a small wall hole. Without overthinking it, I moved closer and slid my finger into the hole. I felt something small inside, turned it clockwise, and heard a faint click across the room. One wooden panel shifted slightly open. My heart pounded violently. We designed and built this house together from scratch. Only a few people could possibly know about a hidden room: the architect, the builders, and Rebecca. She was the only one with genuine reason to create a secret space. When I pulled the door open, a light strip activated automatically, illuminating a narrow space. The hidden room's light was connected to the sewing room switch, meaning I'd only discovered it by accidentally breaking that bulb. Inside, the space was shallow but meticulously organized. Clothes hung on a steel rod, sleek, revealing outfits I'd never seen Rebecca wear in our entire relationship. Beneath them, a small dresser overflowed with expensive lingerie that seemed to belong in someone else's life entirely. Nearby, rows of high heels lined the floor perfectly. On one side, the room ended with a wooden wall. On the other, a steel surface suggested more. I found a gap between the steel and wall. It wasn't just a wall, it was actually a door. Unlocking it revealed a massive fireproof safe, the kind that could only have been installed during construction. How had I completely missed this? I tried the safe's handle, expecting it locked. To my shock, it turned easily. Rebecca must have been confident I'd never find it, or maybe she didn't think I'd ever question her at all. Inside, steel shelves lined the top 2/3, while the bottom held a large metal box. The first thing I noticed was a glossy cruise brochure featuring an Antarctic ice shelf. Beneath it were similar brochures for Alaska, the Caribbean, all places Rebecca claimed to have visited with her aunt. These were clearly props for the elaborate stories she'd fabricated. The shelves were packed with documents, ledgers, and unmarked deeds, each labeled with initials and specific dates. The top DVD read, AK, August 4th, 2016, about 20 months ago. On the bottom shelf sat an open wooden tray glittering with jewelry, expensive pieces carelessly tossed around as if worthless. But two satin ring boxes stood out, carefully placed. One held a large, flawless diamond. The other contained two simple rings, Rebecca's engagement ring and wedding band, the ones I'd given her. Seeing them there felt like being punched in the gut. I sank to my knees, completely overwhelmed. Rebecca wasn't wearing her wedding ring. Wherever she wasn't presenting herself as married. I pulled myself together when my phone alarm went off. Time to collect the kids. I suppressed the grief, picked up our children, and went to my sister Charlotte's for dinner. While the kids played, I whispered everything to Charlotte and her husband. They were shocked, unable to believe Rebecca capable of such elaborate deception. But they agreed I needed to examine those documents thoroughly for real answers. Later that evening, after putting kids to bed with the baby monitor nearby, I returned to the basement. Instead of starting with papers, I focused on the metal box at the safe's bottom. It was incredibly heavy, far heavier than expected. When I finally pried it open, I froze completely. Inside were gold bars, 11 of them, some small, others larger, all unmistakably valuable. Years ago, Rebecca had convinced me to buy a single small gold bar as investment. It was still at the bank, but this represented over $1 million in gold. Where had Rebecca gotten this? My eyes drifted to the provocative clothes hanging nearby, and a sickening thought took hold. I reached for one of the labeled items. It wasn't a magazine, it was an accounting ledger written in shorthand. The first page listed a balance carried forward from the previous year. Entries tracked amounts in both dollars and gold ounces meticulously. The far right column showed total value, over $1.6 million. This wasn't just about money. It was about a complete life Rebecca had kept hidden from me. I flipped to recent months. 3 cash deposits of $1,500 each, all on Wednesdays. The pattern continued through multiple months consistently. Then suddenly, a $20,000 deposit immediately withdrawn the next day. I grabbed earlier journals. Each showed similar patterns. Regular $1,500 Wednesday deposits, with occasional $20,000 entries marked with locations like West Indies or Greece. Those were her supposed cruise destinations. The oldest journal, from 2003, the year before we met, showed more frequent entries, but smaller amounts starting at $200, rising to $600 within months. Each entry had a signature beside it, about 4 or 5 different ones. I shifted to the envelopes. The first contained registration papers for a Ferrari, registered to Rebecca less than 2 years ago. A car worth at least $500,000. Where was it? A random memory surfaced suddenly. Last year, I'd stopped at a red light next to a red Ferrari convertible. I'd admired the car, not particularly noticing the blonde woman driving, even though she looked about my age. An older man sat beside her, his hand resting casually on her bare leg. The driver glanced my way briefly, then quickly looked away. The light turned green, but the Ferrari lingered before turning off a couple of blocks later. Could that have been Rebecca in disguise? We definitely didn't have a Ferrari parked at home. Maybe she drove it once weekly on Wednesdays, disguised in a wig, scarf, and oversized sunglasses. The next envelope was thick and heavy, filled with cash. I set it aside, uninterested. Underneath was a brochure for luxury Riverview apartments, units starting at $750,000. Rebecca and I had discussed these apartments when first announced. We could have eventually afforded one, but Rebecca seemed content with our life. Or so I thought. I spotted a folded paper on the closet floor, a blank title deed for one of the apartments with Rebecca's maiden name written at the bottom. Where the official stamp should be was a crude sketch of one, with a handwritten note beside it. You know what you have to do to get the real one. I had no idea what that meant, but Rebecca might have. The next envelope held an appraisal for a large diamond ring valued at $132,000. I opened the velvet box from the safe again. There it was, a 5-carat diamond, brilliant and flawless. The appraisal was dated July 2014, when our middle child was just a baby. All that remained were the DVDs, 6 discs total, 3 with different initials dated shortly after our engagement. The other 3 labeled AK, one from 3 months before our wedding, another from 7 years later, and the last from under 2 years ago. I stared at them, debating whether to watch now. Exhaustion from a sleepless night weighed heavily on me, and I knew whatever was on those discs would haunt me for a long time. I still had kids to care for, so I texted my sister asking if she could watch Violet the next day, then went to bed hoping for rest, but knowing sleep wouldn't come easily. The next morning, after dropping kids off and leaving Violet with Charlotte, I returned home at 8. I slid the first DVD into the player. The label read SJ, September 20th, 2005, the month I proposed to Rebecca. Rebecca's voice filled the room. I turned to the TV and sank into the couch, my worst fears confirmed. She was talking to a man named Steven, discussing a twisted scenario where Rebecca would pretend to be his wife and let another man seduce her. Their conversation was casual, rehearsed, as if this wasn't their first time. Steven handed Rebecca a bag with his wife's clothes. Rebecca undressed without hesitation, slipping into delicate lingerie and a sundress, styling her hair exactly like Steven's wife wore hers. It was a hotel room with a kitchenette and table set for dinner, attempting to mimic home. But Rebecca's voice, speaking directly to camera, cut through my observations. She addressed Jessica, Steven's wife, revealing everything. Steven wanted Jessica to sleep with other men but didn't have courage to tell her directly. So he paid Rebecca to act it out. For nearly 2 years, he'd made Rebecca shower with Jessica's soap, wear her clothes, even her used underwear, then pretend to be Jessica while servicing strangers, clients, neighbors, even his boss. Hearing this shattered me completely. I thought I was prepared to see Rebecca with another man, but this was something much darker. The video wasn't just for Steven's pleasure. It was insurance. Blackmail disguised as documentation. I paused the video and rushed to Rebecca's sewing room, flipping through 2005 ledgers hunting for any transaction linked to Steven. A few deposits in September, but nothing after. No large payments, no clear blackmail evidence. Confused, I returned to finish watching. Steven had brought in a man named Jimmy, pretending he was an old college friend. The scene played out like a cheap adult film, Stephen left the room, leaving Jessica, actually Rebecca, to seduce Jimmy. She played the part perfectly, feigning reluctance, while Stephen pressured her to give in. Afterward, Jimmy dressed and left without a word. Stephen called Rebecca his beautiful temptress, praising her performance. Then he was on top of her, and they started again. I sat on the floor completely stunned. It wasn't just what I saw, it was how convincing Rebecca was in the role. She wasn't my wife in that video. She was someone else entirely. Then Rebecca faced the camera fully dressed, her tone icy. She left a message for Stephen telling him to stay away, never contact her again, act like they'd never met. If they crossed paths, if he slipped up, she'd send the video to his wife. Her smile was cold, calculated. I felt sick. This wasn't blackmail driven by desperation. It was control power. I forced myself through the next DVDs. Similar patterns, different men, same cold warnings at the end. But then came the AK DVDs. 3 of them. When his face appeared on screen, I felt recognition. I paused, studying his face, but the memory wouldn't come until I saw his profile. That was it, the man from the Ferrari, the one I'd seen with the blonde who looked suspiciously like Rebecca. The first video confirmed it. They were in our old house, our bedroom. She brought him into our home, our sacred space. The second video was dated August 2013. Rebecca was pregnant with our middle child. How could she betray me while carrying our baby? The final video was from 2016, when she was pregnant with Violet. This time the scene was in the guest room, now Violet's room. Unlike the other videos, there was no threatening message at the end. Why not? I had more questions than answers. In a daze, I picked up the kids and went to Charlotte's for dinner. While kids played, I whispered everything to her. She was as stunned as I was. Rebecca had been a high-priced escort, catering to wealthy clients willing to pay for her beauty and submission. After we met, she slowly phased them out. But AK, this Arthur, remained. The gifts, the gold, the Ferrari all pointed back to him. Charlotte finally asked the question I'd been avoiding. What was I going to do? My first instinct was divorce. The betrayal was too deep, too long-standing. But beneath the anger, I felt something worse, heartbreak. Thinking about modern divorce laws left me bitter. Rebecca would likely keep her hidden fortune, live in my house, have custody of the kids while I paid support. She'd probably keep seeing her benefactor too. The idea of losing my children was unbearable. I had to find a way to prevent that. The only non-negotiable part was staying close to my kids, even if it meant living under the same roof with Rebecca. But Charlotte snapped me back to reality. I assumed I had control over how this would play out. But what if Rebecca had her own plans? With her secret assets and shady contacts, would I even have a say? Was I still part of her future? Or was she already preparing to cut me out completely? Charlotte pointed out that maybe Rebecca wasn't as untouchable as I thought. Whoever controlled the money controlled the situation, and now I had some of that control. After dinner, I accepted Charlotte's offer to let the kids stay over, giving me time to dig deeper. Once kids were asleep, we combed through ledgers and notes late into the night. By morning, I'd hidden everything, the safe contents, gold, jewelry, cash, even the Ferrari title, in waterproof containers buried under the compost pile in the backyard. I'd double-check in daylight, but for now, I had the upper hand. As we continued reading, it became clear Rebecca had many clients before we got engaged. But after the wedding, it was just Arthur. She was smart, ensuring her past clients stayed away through those threatening videos. Her double life stretched on for years, charging $1,500 per Wednesday session, except during holidays, school breaks, or when Arthur was away. Once yearly, she'd fake a trip to her aunt's and either stay with him or travel somewhere together. Those trips cost him $20,000 each time. The ledgers were meticulous, even recording extravagant gifts. $100,000 after our first child, a diamond ring after our second, and the Ferrari during her pregnancy with Violet. Whether it was to keep Arthur's interest or for herself, who knew? After a decade, even affairs needed spicing up. A few entries puzzled us, though. Last month, there was a $20,000 withdrawal labeled HM, right after Arthur's payment. No explanation what it meant. As I pondered this, Charlotte stared at photos of the kids, then turned to me with a question that had haunted me since the first Arthur video. Were the kids even mine? She pulled out old family albums, comparing childhood photos, looking for similarities. Thankfully, we both saw the family resemblance clearly, but doubt lingered. I decided to get DNA and STD tests just to be sure. With no other leads, we agreed to wait for Rebecca's return and confront her directly. It was Thursday, and she wasn't due back until Sunday. I took Monday off work and arranged for Charlotte to watch the kids. The rest was out of my hands. Sunday came and Rebecca didn't show up. No call, no message. Monday passed, the same silence. Frustration turned to anxiety. I filed a missing person report Monday afternoon, sticking to Rebecca's official story, leaving out everything I knew. The cops barely hid their indifference, just another runaway wife, they figured. Don't call us, we'll call you. I told the kids she was delayed and took the rest of the week off to wait. Wednesday, the sound of screeching tires snapped me from my daze. Charlotte burst through the door, waving a newspaper. She flipped to page 5 and shoved it in my face. The headline read, "Local recovery millionaire opens new shelter for misuse sufferers." But it wasn't the article that grabbed me. It was the photo. Arthur Kingston. I recognized him instantly from the most recent AK video with Rebecca. Standing next to him was his wife, looking polished but distant, her face a mask of practiced disinterest. At first glance, she seemed much younger, but closer inspection revealed cosmetic surgery had simply slowed her aging. Arthur Kingston was loaded, the kind of rich where a Ferrari was pocket change. No wonder he looked familiar. He was known for avoiding the spotlight unless it suited him. That explained the car. With Arthur's name, I could find his address, but that put me in a tough spot. If I told police, I'd have to reveal everything about Rebecca's affair. If Rebecca was in trouble, I'd become the prime suspect. After dropping kids with Charlotte, I drove to Arthur's estate, a mansion that could pass for a small country. The gated entrance was secure, and I couldn't see past the fence. While I sat there thinking, a silver Lexus pulled up to the gate. A woman stepped out to check the mailbox. I recognized her immediately, the carefully styled blonde hair from the newspaper photo. Violet from the back seat spoke clearly, her little voice cutting through the silence. "Aunt Julia?" Rage consumed me, realizing Rebecca had taken Violet to the Kingston mansion. The betrayal felt endless. I jumped out and stopped behind Julia Kingston's Lexus. She turned pale but didn't move as I demanded to know how she knew my daughter. Violet, oblivious, waved at her. Julia, clearly rattled, told me to ask her husband before quickly escaping through the gate. Her expression lingered in my mind. Something wasn't adding up. She knew more than she let on. At home, Violet confirmed she'd visited the mansion multiple times. The thought that Arthur might be her father gnawed at me. I picked up DNA test kits on the way home. The kids resembled me and Charlotte, but I needed undeniable proof. I didn't return to the mansion that weekend because that night, the news broke. Arthur Kingston's private jet had crashed in a neighboring state. No survivors. Relief, fear, and frustration collided in my chest. 2 bodies were recovered, both male. So where was Rebecca? Was she alive? Dead? I hated that I wasn't sure which outcome I wanted. The next morning, to my shock, Julia Kingston pulled into my driveway. Why was she here now, after avoiding me before? I had Charlotte take the kids outside. As Julia approached, I let her in, offering water as she settled into the living room. She was composed, but carried an edge I couldn't quite read. Without wasting time, she suggested Arthur's end wasn't an accident. Explosives were found in the wreckage. Unofficial information, she claimed. She implied that I had motive, given the affair and timing of my visit. I shot back, accusing her of having just as much reason to want Arthur dead. We danced around accusations, both probing for the upper hand. Eventually, we agreed to exchange information. Julia revealed Rebecca started escorting during college due to financial troubles. She admitted to enjoying the control and money. Arthur became her client in 2003, and despite attempts to end things in 2006, he convinced her to continue. Over time, he grew obsessed with her having children, rewarding her after each birth. $100,000 after our first child, a diamond ring after our second, and the Ferrari when pregnant with Violet. Hearing Julia casually mention my kids by name hit like a punch to the gut. She admitted Arthur was too vain to accept he couldn't have children. By the time she discovered his perversions, she stayed for the lifestyle. Rebecca had played both of us, manipulating Arthur for gifts while betraying me. The anger burned hot, but underneath it all was growing fear. If Rebecca wasn't dead, where was she? And if she was, how deep was I in this mess? The realization that Rebecca had given me 3 children because an old man paid her to was almost unbearable. Children should be born from love, not greed. Julia confirmed that Arthur had offered to buy Rebecca an apartment if she convinced me to have another child. I turned away, trying to hide my anger, but admitted I already knew. We both knew we were at a standstill. She thought I eliminated Arthur. I thought she did. Both of us had motives. Any investigation would drag both our names through mud. She warned me to think about my children and consequences of publicity. Julia admitted she hadn't loved Arthur in years, but insisted that didn't make her a butcher. I couldn't argue with her logic. She probably deserved her inheritance after putting up with him so long. I laid out my terms. I'd stay quiet if she didn't try to pin Arthur's end on me, and if she told me what she knew about Rebecca's disappearance. After a long pause, Julia revealed that Arthur had taken Rebecca to Mexico on his yacht, but returned alone. When she asked where Rebecca was, Arthur claimed he left her in a bad place for a week. He said Rebecca had tried to blackmail him with incriminating videos, and he wanted to scare her into compliance, maybe even pressure her into having another child. Arthur was on his way back to pick her up when his plane went down. The idea that Arthur had plans to involve me floored me. He didn't know me at all, if he thought I'd quietly accept that. But Julia explained it was never about money for Arthur. Once he had enough wealth, it became about power. There was no greater power than seducing another man's wife, especially under his nose. Arthur believed he could buy my silence with $1 million and even convince me to agree to a 4th child. He thought everyone had a price. The idea made me sick, but I still didn't understand why Arthur had gone to such extremes. When Rebecca tried to leave, Julia hesitated, then admitted that as twisted as it sounded, Arthur loved Rebecca. In his own perverse way, he even convinced himself the children were his. That was too much. I collapsed into a chair, struggling to process everything. It felt like something out of a bad movie. Mexico, really? Julia added that Arthur hadn't planned to damage Rebecca physically. He just wanted to scare her, show her what could happen if she didn't comply. But I knew how ruthless Arthur could be. And now, with him dead, Rebecca was still out there, alone and vulnerable. Julia reminded me of our agreement. No press. I could only nod. My mind was spinning and I couldn't find words to respond. She left, her footsteps echoing through the house like nails in my coffin. Before her visit, I'd been angry, confused, hurt. Now I felt trapped in purgatory of uncertainty. Julia had confirmed my worst fears, and I couldn't unlearn any of it. When the door closed, I lowered my head, realizing the full weight of what had happened. I could never forget Rebecca's betrayal, her endless lies. I could never believe in her love again. Every moment we'd shared, every promise, every whispered word of affection, I'd question all of it for the rest of my life. The sound of my children's laughter drifted in from the backyard, pulling me back from spiraling thoughts. No matter how I felt, they needed me. I had to stay strong for them. My grief and anger would have to wait. I tried to refocus, wondering why Julia had come to me. If she really thought I orchestrated Arthur's homicide, visiting me was a risk. Was she trying to cover her tracks? Was she hiding more than just homicide? And what about Rebecca? Could I even get her out of Mexico? I didn't know where Arthur had left her. And if I managed to bring her home, then what? A dark thought crept into my mind, and no matter how hard I tried to push it away, it lingered. Did I even want to save Rebecca? Before I could push aside the dark thoughts, Charlotte and the kids came bursting into the house, their arrival forcing me to shelve any discussion about Julia's visit. Without speaking about it, we threw ourselves into the usual evening routine, bathing kids and preparing dinner. But Julia's words kept replaying in my mind, tangled with memories of Rebecca. Every recollection now felt tarnished. Later, after kids were finally settled, Charlotte collapsed onto the couch, exhausted. She commented on how hard it had been to get Violet to calm down, then turned her attention to me, asking about Julia's visit. I handed her a glass of wine, feeling unsure where to begin. But I recounted the conversation as best as I could, stumbling slightly when I reached the part about Rebecca's whereabouts. Charlotte listened carefully, then sighed, reflecting on Julia's assurance that Rebecca wasn't being forced into anything initially. Still, the situation left her unsettled, and she questioned what I planned to do. I admitted I didn't have answers. Not about rescuing Rebecca, not about how to even begin. Trying to ground the conversation, Charlotte suggested setting aside any rescue plans for the moment and asked what I intended to do if Rebecca returned. Again, I had no clear answer. She reminded me I needed to start making decisions, come up with some kind of plan. I agreed, but admitted I was struggling to process everything. Reconciling the Rebecca I'd loved for 12 years with the Rebecca of the ledgers, the Ferrari, and the secret room felt impossible. One moment I could picture her in yoga pants, making pancakes on a Sunday morning, and the next I saw her in one of those expensive dresses. And it felt like thinking about two different people. Charlotte admitted that Rebecca's double life unsettled her too, but suggested we go back to basics and weigh the pros and cons. I nodded, knowing it was the only logical thing to do. We listed everything out, and by the end, the reasons for divorce seemed weak compared to the emotional cost of splitting up. Sure, there were massive issues like betrayal and trust, but I had to acknowledge that pride and ego played a role too. On the other hand, staying together meant keeping my assets and avoiding alimony and child support. But those material things didn't compare to the thought of losing daily contact with my kids. The idea of only seeing them on weekends felt unbearable. I loved reading them bedtime stories, tucking them in, just being there for the everyday moments. Even if I exposed Rebecca's secret life, the court might still grant her custody. I admitted to Charlotte that I couldn't believe what I was about to say. She encouraged me to just get it out. I asked if she'd ever thought about not rescuing Rebecca. Her reaction shocked me. She was usually the embodiment of kindness, but she reminded me that Rebecca had cheated on me from the very beginning, lied to me every single day of our relationship. She pointed out that based on divorce laws, if Rebecca didn't come back within 2 years, I could annul the marriage or at least file for abandonment, which might protect me from losing everything and help maintain custody of the kids. Leaving Rebecca in Mexico, she argued, wasn't worse than what Rebecca had done to me all these years. She even suggested that I could ask Julia to ensure Rebecca wasn't damaged. In her mind, that might be better for the kids than a messy divorce. I sipped my wine, mulling over Charlotte's words. Even with full knowledge of Rebecca's betrayal, and even though Charlotte's logic made sense, I wasn't sure I could do it. Could I leave Rebecca in Mexico? The night dragged on, and as I lay in bed staring at the glowing green numbers on the clock, I couldn't shake Charlotte's words from my mind. She cheated from the beginning. Have you thought about not saving her? It'd be worse for the kids than divorce. Rebecca had broken me. She had inflicted wounds so deep I wasn't sure I'd ever fully heal. I questioned every moment of the past 12 years. The Rebecca from the secret room was a stranger to me. But I still loved the Rebecca who had cried with joy when our children were born. The Rebecca who I thought had loved me back. I tried to make sense of why she'd continued her double life, even after we were engaged, after we were married. I could almost understand doing it to cope with financial troubles in college, even if I didn't agree with her choices. But after our commitment, I couldn't fathom it. Those two versions of Rebecca clashed in my mind. The one in yoga pants making pancakes, and the one driving a Ferrari in a blonde wig. The Rebecca in her favorite white dress, and the one wrapped in an expensive gown from the secret room. Which one was the real Rebecca? Would I ever know? How could I believe anything she said again? How could I tell when she was being genuine versus performing? One thing I was sure of, whatever her reasons for having our children, she loved them. That wasn't something she could fake. But the uncertainty about who my wife truly was, what her real intentions were, and where I and our children fit into her life tormented me. I felt like there had to be a way to find out. Something nagged at me, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. But I knew the answer was in that secret room. Without a second thought, I swung my legs out of bed, the cold floorboards chilling my feet. Grabbing the baby monitor, I headed straight for Rebecca's sewing room. I started rifling through the envelopes and loose documents, unsure of what exactly I was searching for, but convinced I'd recognize it when I found it. Moving on to the notebooks, I picked up the most recent one. In my haste, I accidentally dropped a few loose pages tucked in the back. I almost ignored them, but something made me glance down. One page stood out immediately, a flyer that read, "For sale, designs for life." A graphic studio downtown was up for sale. My mind began racing. Rebecca had planned to use part of her hidden fortune to buy me my own design studio. She had been continuing her secret life, selling herself, not for selfish reasons, but for us, for me. I couldn't condone what she'd done, but realizing she had done it for our family hit me hard. I collapsed to my knees, my eyes stinging with tears. I wasn't just part of Rebecca's past, I was part of her future. She loved me. A wave of relief and love surged through me, but Julia's words echoed in my mind. Rebecca had tried to blackmail Arthur to end their relationship. She wanted out. She must have believed she'd saved enough for us to live the life we dreamed of. How she planned to explain the sudden influx of money was unclear. Maybe an inheritance or some lottery win. Whatever her story would have been, her goal was to leave that life behind. Whether our marriage could survive remained a massive question mark. Could I ever erase the images of her with other men from my mind? Could I trust her again, knowing how masterfully she had deceived me for years? But no matter how deeply she betrayed me, she didn't deserve the nightmare she was living now. I had to get her out of that brothel. I prayed Julia knew where Arthur had left Rebecca. That night, I went to bed feeling relieved, believing I had figured everything out, but I woke to harsh flashlight lights shining directly in my face. A man dressed in black with his face hidden by a mask sat at the edge of my bed. He pointed a tool at me, the silencer fitted to the barrel glinting faintly in the dark. His casual greeting, completely at odds with the weapon aimed at me, left me frozen in shock. In that moment, I was convinced Julia had decided to tie up loose ends, eliminating me just like her husband and Rebecca. The thought made me break into a cold sweat, expecting to die. My first instinct was to beg for my children's lives. I pleaded with him desperately, desperate to protect them. But the man clarified he wasn't there to eliminate me or my kids, at least not yet. He even addressed me casually, asking if he could call me by my first name. I nodded slowly, sitting up, trying to process what was happening. Then he asked the question that shook me to the core. Where was my hot little wife? He claimed they were supposed to meet that day, and he seemed frustrated that Rebecca had missed their appointment. He hoped she wasn't trying to back out of a deal. I stared at him, dumbfounded. He adjusted his grip on the tool, subtly shifting its angle, as if to remind me of its presence. I told him the truth. I didn't know where Rebecca was. She'd disappeared over a week ago, and I'd even filed a police report. That didn't satisfy him. He explained that Rebecca owed him money, $20,000 to be exact. They had a business arrangement, half paid up front, half due upon completion. Apparently, the job was done and he wanted his payment. My mind reeled. Rebecca owed money? What kind of business deal was this? As I asked questions, the pieces started falling into place. He made it clear that if I couldn't get the money from Rebecca, I'd have to pay it myself. He leaned in, running the cold metal of the tool along my cheek, and made me repeat his demand. $20,000 by 2 p.m. the next day. Before he left, he gave me one last cold warning. He said he'd checked on my kids before waking me. The message was clear. Pay up, or they wouldn't be safe. Then he walked out like it was no big deal, leaving me staring into the dark, wondering how deep Rebecca's lies went. I jumped out of bed, his words and that quiet, ugly laugh stuck in my head. I rushed to the kids' rooms. They were all asleep and unharmed, and I felt a brief wave of relief. Then my body started shaking. My legs went weak as I stumbled into the living room, trying to think straight. That's when it hit me. The $20,000 note in Rebecca's ledger finally made 6 cents. Half had been paid. The rest was due. And HM wasn't a code. It meant hitman. The job was Arthur Kingston. My stomach turned. I remembered Julia's strange looks, fear, and confusion. Now I understood. Julia didn't plan her husband's passing. Rebecca did. I tried to deny it, but the truth wouldn't budge. The hitman wanted his money. Why would Rebecca do it? Arthur wasn't a threat to me or the kids. He was a threat to her secret life. She chose homicide to protect her double life. That was awful. And if she could do that to him, what about me? I didn't sleep. In the morning, I took the kids to school and left Violet with Charlotte. I told no one. I pulled cash from Rebecca's hidden stash and sealed it in an envelope. The bitter irony hit me. Arthur had basically paid for his own passing, and Rebecca was stuck in Mexico because her plan blew up in her face. At 2:00 p.m., the doorbell rang. It was him. "Hello," he said, way too friendly. I held out the envelope, but I hesitated. How do I know you won't come back after I pay you? He acted offended, then smiled. I'm a pro. Once you pay, we're done. I handed it over, even though trusting him felt crazy. I watched him leave, and his line from the night before replayed. Good kids, real cute. I checked on them. I knew what that meant. If someone paid enough, he'd hurt anyone, even a child. And Rebecca brought him into our home. That outweighed everything else she'd done. The lies, the cheating, none of it compared to risking our kids. I couldn't forgive that. I made my choice. Protect my children, even from their mother. Rebecca's crime could have put her in prison for life, but instead she was trapped in Mexico. In a grim way, it felt like justice. Julia Kingston was never charged, but the scandal destroyed her life. She was shunned, never remarried, had no kids, and died rich but alone. She never blamed me. She feared bad press more than police. After 2 years, the case was closed. The official story was that Mexico's Cortez cartel eliminated Arthur for his work with shelters. I sold our old house. The new owners loved the hidden room, and I showed them how to open it. I moved closer to Charlotte and used part of Rebecca's $1.6 million stash to build a small studio and a stable home. I hired help, and Mrs. Henderson became like a grandma to the kids. 5 years after Rebecca vanished, I met Melissa, a single mom. We both had scars, but we built a good life. Her son Tyler later fell for Violet, but that's another story. DNA tests proved I was the father of all 3 kids. The hitman never came back. Later, a judge ended my marriage for abandonment. I got full custody and all our shared assets. I should have felt relief, but I didn't. I felt hollow. That night after the kids slept, I sat outside with a glass of port, stuck on the same questions. Did I do the right thing? Did I have a choice? What kind of life did I leave Rebecca? I kept coming back to one truth. Rebecca chose this. She planned a homicide and brought danger to our door. I couldn't save her without risking my kids. Before bed, I checked on my children one last time. Tomorrow is a new day, and they deserved a dad who was present. Rebecca made her choice. I made mine. Now I lived with both.